Terror on the Riviera, France hit yet again, leaving 84 dead and more than 200 injured. The attacker turned a 19-ton truck into a deadly weapon, careering down the promenade in Nice, full of families celebrating Bastille Day. Men, women and children were mown down indiscriminately as thousands fled for their lives.
When we came back up onto the promenade, probably 10 or 15 minutes later, the scene of devastation was quite horrific.
The terrorist fired at police before being shot dead. He's been named as 31-year-old French-Tunisian Mohamed Laouedj Boulouel. We're live in Nice tonight as this latest horror leaves France reeling in shock, but there's growing anger too, also on News at 10. Turmoil in Turkey tonight, tanks and gunfire on the streets with claims of an attempted presidential coup. And the Prime Minister and the First Minister, Theresa May, sends a clear message to Scotland: there will be no second referendum.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham in France.
Good evening. We go on air tonight with France, a country in turmoil after the terrorist attack in Nice, while in the last hour, Turkey has been plunged into turmoil of a different kind. There, it appears an attempted military coup is underway, and we will bring you more on that later on in the programme. But first to events here in the south of France. People were packed in their thousands along the glittering seafront of the Riviera last night to celebrate Bastille Day and everything it means to be French. But just as the families had finished gazing at fireworks in a summer sky, their joy turned to horror when a truck was driven at high speed along the Promenade des Anglais here in Nice and right at them. At least 84 people died, including 10 children and teenagers, as the terrorists swerved the 19-ton lorry from side to side in order to kill as many people as possible. And once again, France has been left in a state of shock by a major assault on its most cherished belief, liberty. The liberty to speak out with Charlie Hebdo, the freedom to enjoy life in Paris, and now in Nice, the national celebration of liberty itself, Bastille Day, was under attack.
This is not a conflict zone, it's the French Riviera, and the white lorry is being used as a weapon in a mass murder. Look again, and you'll see a man on a scooter attempting to stop it. He falls off and attempts to run alongside it. His bravery is for nothing. The police take aim, but the truck plows on. It will kill dozens more. Not again, they must have thought, here and across France. Children were in the lorry's path. Surely no coincidence that the attacker chose Bastille Day for this slaughter. The police eventually stopped the vehicle using the only option they still had. By now, Mohamed Laouedj Boulouel had driven for more than a mile, careering into passers-by. An attack against innocent people and their values. Officers moved in cautiously to check that he was dead. All it took was a lorry for his act of DIY terrorism. The driver had rented this vehicle just 2 days earlier.
When the truck passed, people fell down like bowling pins. I turned around and I could no longer see my friend at my height, so I started to look on the ground. I saw her lying on the ground, unconscious.
And a British man treated at the hospital today described the horror that brought him there.
We were immediately concerned with getting away and trying to get to what might be a safe place. When we came back up onto the promenade, probably 10 or 15 minutes later, the scene of devastation was quite horrific, with debris and injured people or bodies covering the promenade. It was unspeakably disgusting, awful.
Mohamed Lequage Boulouel drove his rented 19-ton Renault truck to the Promenade des Anglais just after 10:30 p.m. He suddenly accelerated towards the crowd of revellers, eyewitnesses say, at a speed of 40 miles per hour. The truck swerved through the throng, mounting the curb, deliberately hitting pedestrians. Many people jumped into the sea or fled to nearby hotels to escape, including the famous Negresco Hotel. When he reached the Palais de Méditerranée, he repeatedly shot at the police, but died after an exchange of fire, and the truck eventually came to a halt after more than a mile. Weapons, including 2 automatic pistols, 2 replica Kalashnikovs, and a grenade were found inside the vehicle. This is the 7th time in 18 months that the French president has had to react to a terrorist attack. The ritual is all too familiar now, but perhaps it doesn't get easier. It certainly doesn't for them. This was the reception as the presidential motorcade passed the scene of the attack. This woman is furious at the lack of security she believes allowed the attack to happen. Where were the police yesterday, they ask.
There's no security. The forces of order, the police, doesn't act to assure the security of people, of tourists, of us who are living here.
Later, the French Prime Minister said no, there were no security failings in Nice. There were once again police commitments to which we have given the means. This is the lorry that did so much damage last night. More damage than any firearm could. Its windscreen peppered with bullet holes. Tonight it was removed from the streets where it and its driver caused so much terror. Rohit Katru, News at 10, Nice.
Well, there were plenty of tourists in the crowds that came under attack along the Promenade des Anglais, but Bastille Day is, of course, very much a family celebration. Children out with parents and grandparents allowed to stay up late to watch the fireworks in the good feeling of a summer's evening. It is horribly telling that the number of children and teenagers killed and injured is higher than in any other recent European attack. They and their families among the people the terrorists had so ruthlessly and indiscriminately targeted to kill.
This time last night, they were planning one of the big nights of their holiday. Tonight, the photographs of Sean Copeland from Texas and his 11-year-old son, Brody, are being shown around the world, among the first victims of the Nice attack. Russian student Victoria Savchenko was just 21. She'd been watching the fireworks on the promenade with a friend. The lorry careered into her, killing her instantly. Swiss national Linda Casanova and her husband were visiting Nice during Bastille Day. Her brother has since confirmed that she also lost her life here. And while there are scores of victims, Fatima Charihi was the very first. A mum of 7 who wore a veil. Her son attempted to resuscitate her at the scene. And Michael Pellegrini, 28 years old, and one of at least 3 generations of the same family, wiped out. At Nice Cathedral tonight, there were prayers for all of the dead, including the Tunisian family slain by a countryman. There were prayers too for a city and a country bewildered by continual attacks. Melanie Monteroux was watching the fireworks with her 20-month-old daughter.
I couldn't move, and her father came, took the pushchair in his arms, took me in the other arm, and get us inside a hotel to get us, in safety. and everybody was crying in the hotel.
Joel Fenster is a British lawyer who was caught in the attack.
The reaction is what scares me, the reaction that always follows these attacks. The last 2 weeks it was already alarming me how many people I'd talked to about the rise of the far right, and they would tell me that they were supportive of it. And I've no doubt this is the kind of incident that pushes people further towards that. And even going through what I did last night and seeing so many people on the news this morning who unfortunately didn't make it, my fear is that the reaction is greater support for that, and I don't think that's the answer.
What the consequence will be is for another time. For now, this deeply disturbed country must try to take in what has happened here. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Nice.
So who was Mohamed Laouedj Boulouel, the man who killed so many here on the seafront at Nice? Born in Tunisia, he'd had run-ins with the law for various petty crimes, but wasn't on France's terrorist radar. Now a major investigation has been scrambled into action to find out if the attacker was working alone or had any associates.
A grainy ID photograph tells us little about the motives and the mind of a mass murderer. Through the day, a few facts have emerged, but nothing as yet to explain what put him behind the wheel of this vehicle and why he used it to take so many innocent lives. The Paris prosecutor this afternoon talked about a man with a record of petty crime, but no indication of the carnage he was planning. He was totally unknown to the security services. He doesn't appear on records of terrorist suspects or of those suspected of radicalisation. Mohamed Laouedj Boulouel was a 31-year-old who held joint French-Tunisian nationality. He was known to police, even given a suspended sentence for attacking another man in March. But critically, he appears not to be on any terror watch lists. He had moved to France in 2005, having been brought up in Tunisia, a country that's seen more citizens join IS than any other. This is the block of flats where Boulouel lived in an unfashionable area of Nice. While police were searching the building, neighbours talked of a man who drank and didn't seem at all religious. He looked at us weirdly, wouldn't open his door, she said. I thought not normal. In a raid linked to this investigation, police arrested a woman. Her identity has not been confirmed, but the authorities have said Boulouel's ex-wife is now in custody.
Laissez-les dans le stress. Laissez-les dans l'insécurité.
One theory being investigated is that the killer may have watched videos like this, in which so-called Islamic State call on Muslims in France to use cars as weapons to spread terror.
Tuez-les, crachez-leur sur le visage, écrasez-les avec vos voitures.
Mohamed Boulouel was a delivery driver. Today, the street outside his home in Nice was evacuated while police carried out a controlled explosion on a parked van. And neighbours wondered about other young men living in their midst. Paul Davis, News at 10.
Well, let's get more now from our security editor, Rohit Khatri, who's joined me here. A huge collective sigh of relief after Euro 2016 that it had passed off without such a terrible incident. Have the security services here let their guard down?
I think that's perhaps a little strong. Clearly, though, the focus now shifts to soft targets, hard targets, soft targets. It's clear that in this modern age of Islamist terrorism in Europe, there is no real distinction between the open-air event here last night and the apparently secure event at the Stade de France on November the 13th. But clearly, right across this country, there will now be a demand, a clamour for greater protection of open-air events. I'm sure that there'll be demands for roads like this to be reconstructed and barriers built right along them. But the reality is that that was not the cause of what happened here. There are deeper concerns about France's role in the international arena and whether it's now paying the price for that action abroad in Syria and West Africa as well. And two, also whether the siloization, as it's described, the apartheid within Muslim communities and non-Muslim communities in this country is now paying its price many months on. And so those are concerns that will also be addressed here.
Okay, Rohit, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, the words of the French Prime Minister in the wake of last night's horror in Nice were both resigned and chilling. France, he said, has to learn to live with terrorism. Words echoed by the country's President, François Hollande, who declared 3 days of national mourning and vowed to hit back hard. Once again, the slaughter of a terrorist attack has left France a nation on edge.
With France's state of emergency extended, extraordinary measures have become everyday. On the Champs-Élysées this evening, among the tourists and the shoppers, police officers carry rifles. The alert level is at its highest across the country. The risk of another attack is thought to be imminent. And in the face of it, a president who sounds determined.
Rien ne nous fera céder.
Nothing will make us yield in our will to fight against terrorism. And we will once again reinforce our activities in Syria and Iraq. And we will continue to strike precisely those who strike us on our own soil in their hideouts.
Sur notre propre sol, dans leurs repères.
Café culture on the pavements of Paris goes on, of course, but the new realities of life in France are deeply unsettling for its people. At the Place de République, where they come to honour the dead and to show solidarity against the terrorists, old tributes from previous attacks are replaced with new ones.
The French government now speaks routinely of the war that terrorism has brought to France. Well, it's a war that's going to be difficult to fight, where the battlefields could be anywhere, and the enemy is at best hard to find, and at worst, completely unknown.
Just yesterday, the streets of the capital were the venue for the pomp and ceremony of Bastille Day, the annual national celebration. But there are significant sections of French society which feel little connection to any of this. Around 1,800 people had left France to join IS in Iraq and Syria as of last summer. Some 250 have since returned. In communities where there are feelings of exclusion and lack of opportunities, the road to jihadism often starts with crime.
Those attacks, as we've seen in Paris last year, invariably involve young men of immigrant troubled backgrounds who are involved in criminality, from armed robbery to drug dealing. Terror threats in France have more to do with a homegrown criminal underclass rather than ISIL.
The number of domestic intelligence agents in France is set to rise by 50% in the next 2 years. The very urgent question here, though, is whether whatever the government does will be enough to stop the next attack. Geraint Vincent, News at 10, Paris.
Well, in Britain, Theresa May was less than 3 days into her new job as Prime Minister when the atrocity in Nice unfolded. She spoke today of her horror at the attack, saying Britain stands shoulder to shoulder with France. Well, I'm joined now from Westminster by our political correspondent Romilly Weeks. And Romilly, clearly a big test for our new Prime Minister.
Yes, it is the first and heaviest duty of the Prime Minister to keep the country safe. And Theresa May has found herself in the first week having to not only reassure the British public, but also express our solidarity with France in its time of grief. Tonight, the French tricolour and the Union Jack is still flying at half-mast over Downing Street. Theresa May has returned from her trip to Scotland. She's called President Hollande to offer every assistance and support. Earlier today, this is what she had to say.
If, as we fear, this was a terrorist attack, then we must redouble our efforts to defeat these brutal murderers who want to destroy our way of life. We must work with France and our partners around the world to stand up for our values and for our freedom.
In terms of security here, the threat level has not been raised. It remains at severe, but security around large public events is being reviewed. That's not, we understand, in relation to any specific intelligence, but it is, as the Prime Minister's spokesman said, in the light of the terrible events in France, just the prudent and sensible thing to do now.
Romilly, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, condemnation was swift in the United States too. President Obama calling it an horrific terrorist attack. But in what could prove to be an even more significant intervention, the Republican presidential candidate, Donald Trump, said on social media, "When will we learn? It's only getting worse." To our Washington correspondent Robert Moore now. And Robert, with the Republican convention just about to start, how central could this attack become to Mr. Trump's agenda?
Well, in this election season, undoubtedly what happened in Nice does play and does have a significant political impact here. It plays straight into the Donald Trump narrative of his campaign, that America needs to think about building walls and pulling up its drawbridge, specifically in terms of banning Muslims from entering the United States. However unconstitutional and indeed counterproductive that might prove to be. In stark contrast to that, President Obama a short time ago, speaking to the Washington Diplomatic Corps, said America would relentlessly pursue the Islamic State, what he called a vile organization. But he said America would not do that at the cost of American values.
In the wake of last night's attacks, we've heard more suggestions that all Muslims in America be targeted, tested for their beliefs, some deported or jailed. And the very suggestion is repugnant and an affront to everything that we stand for as Americans.
Well, the Republican convention begins here in Cleveland just in a few days' time, a big moment for Donald Trump. Today he made his vice presidential pick, a pretty obscure politician, Mike Pence, a governor of Indiana. Trump is behind in the polls, but there are plenty of analysts, I think rightly, who say that a major terrorist attack here on US soil could give him a significant boost in winning the White House. It would potentially swing public opinion behind his incendiary, isolationist and xenophobic message and rhetoric.
Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, now to Turkey, where tonight dramatic events appear to be unfolding. In the last hour, part of the Turkish military has claimed it has taken power in the country. It said the takeover was because what it called democratic and secular rule has been eroded by President Erdogan's government. Earlier, Turkey's Prime Minister said a coup attempt had been launched and the perpetrators would pay the highest price.
The Bosphorus Bridge in Istanbul is blocked by military vehicles. Soldiers shouting to commuters tonight. A curfew has been imposed. This is not an exercise. Everyone is being told to go home. Surreal scenes in Istanbul and Ankara as tanks roll through the streets. Jets flying at low level overhead. All this a show of force to President Erdogan. Followed by a statement from the Turkish military confirming that they have taken over. Reports gunshots have been heard in Ankara, while the Prime Minister's confirmed the military action is not authorised, but says it is not a coup. But evidence of tanks surrounding the entrance to Istanbul's Ataturk airport suggests otherwise. This was the scene of a terrorist attack less than 3 weeks ago. Suicide bombers blowing themselves up at the terminal entrance, killing dozens of people. Turkey's security situation is a growing concern for its citizens. Hundreds of people have been killed in terror attacks on its soil in the last 9 months. And now this. The picture in Turkey is a confusing one. While President Erdogan is said to be safe tonight, reports say the Turkish chief of military staff is among hostages being held in Ankara. Soldiers are said to be inside the buildings of Turkish state broadcaster TRT, and access to social media has been restricted. The picture is still unfolding in Turkey, and it's not yet clear if this coup will be or has been successful. Sally Lockwood, News at 10.
Now, after her words about Nice, Theresa May travelled to Scotland for her first official engagement outside London as Prime Minister. She told the people of Scotland they have had their vote on independence, but she was willing to listen to their concerns about Europe. Nicola Sturgeon was firm that a second independence referendum remains an option.
It was just 3 short weeks ago today that the country voted to leave the European Union. That was, of course, the decision of the UK as a whole, but not the decision here in Scotland. And it has placed the 4 nations of the kingdom and the leaders in them on a collision course. And so before any visit anywhere else, the Prime Minister made her way to a wet Edinburgh today. Theresa May wanted to meet Scotland's First Minister face-to-face just 2 days after taking over in Downing Street, and that says something of her concern about the future of the United Kingdom. Because Nicola Sturgeon says another independence referendum is now possible. Many others in Scotland think one inevitable.
As far as I'm concerned, the Scottish people had their vote. They voted in 2014 and a very clear message came through. Both the United Kingdom and the Scottish Government said they would abide by that. We now have the challenge, though, as a United Kingdom, to ensure that we can get the best possible deal for the whole of the United Kingdom from the EU negotiations.
It may be that if we want to protect our relationship with the European Union, then Scotland will have to consider becoming an independent member of the European Union. But I've also said that I want to consider all options along the way, and the Prime Minister has said that this process will be open to considering options that we bring forward.
The sight of the new Prime Minister here today was both welcome and unwelcome. But the Conservative leader north of the border says Scotland should now conclude the union with England, Wales and Northern Ireland is more important than the union with Europe.
You don't address the issues regarding leaving one union by pulling yourselves out of another union, the United Kingdom, which is worth 4 times more in terms of trade, in terms of people, in terms of business.
But tonight it's not at all clear how the Scottish and UK governments can come to an agreement on the European Union when they're already marching in completely opposite directions.
And Chris Shipp joins me now live from Edinburgh tonight. So despite all the events here in France, Chris, Theresa May went ahead with her plans to head to Scotland, a real sign of intent.
Yes, I think that's right, Julie. Both the Prime Minister and the First Minister said that the talks were constructive. In fact, the Prime Minister said that it was an excellent meeting, to use her words. And whilst the UK government has now promised to listen to the concerns and consult Scotland's First Minister as we move towards Brexit, it's frankly hard to see how there can really be a happy ending here. Theresa May's been quite clear. She said Brexit means Brexit. Equally, Nicola Sturgeon's been quite clear. She says Scotland's place in the EU must be secure. Now, as far as I can see, either Scotland stays in the UK and leaves the EU, or it stays in the EU and leaves the UK. I don't simply know what the third option is, although these is pretty much an unprecedented situation. You're right though, Julie, despite the events where you are, this visit did still go ahead. That's a sign of how important these Brexit talks are. But tonight, I'm sure Theresa May is also getting to grips with what's happening in Turkey. I know the Foreign Secretary has been made aware of events. We can expect a statement shortly from the Foreign Office. But it's a reminder, as much as Brexit is important, other events are still happening.
Indeed, Chris, thank you for that. Well, back now to the events here in Nice, and tonight all across the city there will be families grieving and others holding their children a little closer after a shocking attack which took so many young lives. Early this evening I met the Facchini family who'd come down to look at the flowers laid in this makeshift shrine behind me here. Their dad Patrick is a fireman and had worked all night. His dedication in such horror and grief, perhaps a testament that the true spirit of Bastille Day remains despite the attack. He's been a fireman in Nice for 39 years, yet nothing could have prepared Patrick Facchini for what unfolded last night. His wife Eve and 2 sons had thankfully gone home early from the fireworks, but he had to face the aftermath of an attack which has shaken this city to its core.
I organised all the injured who arrived in order to identify them and sent them to the various hospitals. I listened to people who were crying, who were saying they were hurting here and here. I checked the severity of their injuries, how to classify them, whether they were serious or minor injuries, organised the families who arrived. Then I got home, I broke down, but not during the operation itself.
There were so many young children killed and injured last night. As a mum and a dad, that must be a terrifying thing to happen on your streets.
Completely, yes. It's very hard to know that a lot of children have been killed last night in a terrible way. It's very sad.
Their eldest son, Marc Aurel's been checking on his friends all day to see if they're okay. Thankfully they are, but some with harrowing stories.
They told me today that they saw the lorry and they started to run away in every direction because they were scared to die. They ran, hid wherever they could and then tried to find their families.
For this one 12-year-old, it's been a terrifying time, but he's determined to be optimistic.
We spoke about this attack. We said it was awful, terrifying, shocking, and we said that we must keep our heads up and keep fighting.
Very hopeful and resilient little boy. Well, I'm joined now by Emma Murphy, our correspondent. Emma, it's not so long you were here, the streets filled with happiness for the great celebration of football.
Yes, indeed. That was only 2 weeks ago. When we left here, there were the Iceland fans still here. The streets echoed to the sound of that clap and their delight. And all the way along this promenade, there was the fan zone, there were the table tennis tables, the makeshift football areas, and it was just such a wonderful celebration. But the threat and the fear was never really that far away. There was always a very heavy police presence, a heavy armed police presence, and they knew that they were vulnerable to this. There were 30,000 extra people in this city at the time, and when the whole tournament was over at the beginning of this week, there was a palpable sense of relief in this country. But for this to happen so quickly, so soon after they thought they'd got away with it, it highlights just how vulnerable places like this are, and indeed so many parts of this world when soft targets can be hit so simply and so easily.
Emma, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, and in near silence and shock tonight, the city of Nice is coming to terms with its name being added to France's roll call of terrorist outrage. Just over 24 hours ago, a joyous celebration of its liberal democracy, France's national day shared by everyone, from children in their pushchairs to the young families to their grandparents. But now Nice is linked by a cord of terror and pain to its capital city, to the outrage of the Charlie Hebdo attack, another assault on that great tenet of true liberty, freedom of speech, Je suis Charlie, the cry which went up across Europe. And to the horror of the Bataclan just last November, Paris almost brought to its knees an assault on its young enjoying a Friday night out. Now the city of Nice has to bear its loss and find ways to cope and live with the shadow cast across this city. From me and from all of the team here in Nice, have a very good night and a peaceful weekend. Goodbye.